All right, everybody, welcome back to Untangled. I am elated to have my guest today. I don't know if y'all know this, but before we have these calls, we do like little vibe checks, and she definitely passed the vibe check. So I have Clara Kliman-Silver. She's a staff researcher at Google, where she leads the team shaping research strategy and exploring how AI is transforming design and development. She's a longtime community builder with Ladies That UX. Shout out to them. Founding the Boston chapter and now co leading the New York City chapter. Clara has shared her insights at events like South by Southwest and UXPA International, and she brings a unique perspective at the intersection of research, design, and technology. Clara, I'm so excited to have you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Adrienne. I'm so happy to be here. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Happy Friday. All right. So I was telling you about what I had going on before this, but we are here now and I just couldn't wait to have this conversation with you. So Clara, my audience is people all over the UX spectrum, people who are coming into this space, as well as people who are like, why am I still doing this? I need to find something else. Okay. Whole gamut. So if we could, let's start with who are you? And how did you get into UX?
I'm Clara. I am a UX researcher, as you mentioned. I have a background, I guess you could call it that, in cognitive science. Um, I studied brains and computers and language when I was an undergrad, and I actually, for a minute, like really wanted to be a linguist and study how people learn language, how they develop language skills. Um, how they think about language and visual processing. And when I was an undergrad, that led me to work in research labs where I got to help professors and researchers design experiments, work with participants, really think about like not just what are the big questions we're trying to answer, but what are the right ways to answer them? How do you talk about what you're learning? What does it mean? And over time, I started realizing like I really felt at home in the lab and was really excited about learning from my participants and thinking about the implications of the work. In my senior year of college, junior year of college, I met this postdoc who was working in human factors. So we were at this point in a visual and what's called haptic perception laboratory. So thinking about the interplay between what people see and then like how they interact with things. So like if I pick up this cup with water, how do I plan my motion towards the cup to pick it up? And like what are the physical signals that I'm getting from my hands and from like motor movements that tell me that I've reached the cup? Um, so he was thinking about like what would this mean for medical devices and tools that doctors and dentists and other medical professionals would be using in their work, and how could we design better tools to help them with specific tasks that are challenging from vision only. So I was fascinated by that, and I thought this is super interesting. I would love to take what we're doing in the lab and apply it to these real world situations and see how we could help people who are doing these other things. And that led me to explore what fields I might be interested in that would allow me to do that. And I came across UX. So that's what brought me to it. I did design for a while. I had the privilege of working on design teams and learning a lot on the job. And then I went back and forth between design and research for a number of years. And now I've been a researcher for the last 7.
So, one of the first questions that I had for you is, what is a staff researcher at Google? Right? Because I've heard all kind of descriptions. So, what does that mean at Google?
Great question. So, as a staff researcher at Google, I would say it's like a mid senior level research role. I lead a research team of 5, 6-ish people. They're all UXRs and they're all fabulous. And we basically work across a fairly wide range of products, mostly in the designer developer tooling space. So a mix of internal tools, and then also we work on the material design system, which is you'll see in Google products and is also available publicly. Um, so it's really like the purview across a wide range of products or topics, themes, areas. I do a lot of, I'd say as a manager, I'm not doing a ton of day-to-day research anymore, but some of my peers who don't manage but are at this level do a ton of research. Um, but I'm thinking a lot about not just the actual research and how to do it and how to plan it, but also the strategic outcomes. So my team learned like all of these things from the last 10 studies they ran. What does that mean for the products that we're building? What does that mean about the direction that our wider organization should be going for XYZ? So I would say it's like a lot of still a lot of hands on the ground research, but also a lot of strategic thinking. Sometimes I call myself a research strategist because I think that better describes what I do rather than like a hardcore researcher. um,
Mhm, mhm.
but I love it all. It's all super fun.
So let's talk about that just a little bit. So I think
Hmm.
a lot of people struggle with what is a strategist, right? So can you talk about what does strategy look like at your level? So what does that look like, and how would you define a strategist?
Great question. So for me personally, and I think as with any company and any role, like there are many different ways that strategy can manifest. I'm often thinking about what is it that we as an organization need to know. So I'm thinking about it as a researcher because that's my background and that's my area of expertise, but I'm frequently engaging in these conversations with peers who are engineers, who are product managers, who are designers. So people and we're sort of all asking the same questions like what do we want to do next or what where should our products go? um, or what we know that we want to do X, like what are the major things that will get us there or are blocking us from getting there, and then how do we solve that? So then I'm coming in as a researcher and I'm saying, well, here are the questions and here's how I recommend that we answer them, and then I'll either go answer them myself or I'll work with folks on my team to do that. But it's really about like what is the bigger picture. And then I think once we have the research, of course, like I want to be able to say, we did this study, we learned this thing, and therefore, that means X. But beyond X, like what does that mean about investment more broadly? And when I say investment, I mean strategic investment. Like, is this the right direction to go in? Um, Not maybe what does that mean for the next month, the next sprint cycle, but also what could that mean for the next year, the next 3 years? So a lot of the work that my team and I are doing are focused both on these like immediate outcomes, but also on building multi-year roadmaps and really thinking about like what is the future of the stuff that we're doing and what does that mean in terms of not just where our 5-person or 15-person team, but like where should our greater organization be going?
That seems like because thinking about where you are, right, and the speed of technology, I think that might be a little bit intimidating, right? To say, how do I guess where we're going to be? I look at like things like just how far we've come in AI, in the space of AI in like the
Hmm.
last 6 months. It's like, what? That's
Yeah.
awesome. Okay, so let's take a step back. So of course I cyber stalked you, and you had this concept of UI linting on your
Hmm.
in something that you were writing about, and I don't even know that I know what that is. So can we talk about what that is and why that's something that you're thinking about?
Absolutely. So one of my interests is actually in AI, and I've been interested in AI for a long time, but I would say the last 10ish years of my career have either directly been in AI or AI adjacent. So I I would say that a lot of my work over that time period has revolved around what is the role of AI in as a productivity tool. So it can be a creative tool, it can be something for fun, but if I'm like, I guess in a previous role, like the question was, I work in a factory, for example, and I have specific tasks that I need to automate, maybe aren't safe for a human to do or risky for a human to do. How do I turn them over to a robot? When does it make sense to do that? What are the risks and so on and so forth? And then how do people feel about handing these things off to AI? And I would say that now, of course, in like a very different sense, has been the thrust of the work that I do and that my team does. Um, One of these like maybe less scary things is thinking about the role of AI in design. Um, so UI linting is in many ways just like spell check for your design. So thinking about, you have a design file that you've created a design, you have some reference point. So it could be a design system like material, it could be accessibility guidelines, it could be a color palette, but you're basically running this design through this tool called a linter, which could be a plugin in your design tool, could be like spell check, but it's basically checking to make sure that the design is compliant with whatever these standards are. And this is this is a thing that you see all the time in software development. Pretty much any software development environment will have some kind of linter to make sure that the code is right. Again, like sort of spell check for code. Will this code run? Did you use these commands in the right way? So UI linting is very analogous there. We've been interested in it because I think when a lot of the AI hype started in the design space, this was sort of a very obvious application of AI to design. And it's something that theoretically shouldn't be that challenging of a problem when you compare it to things like you know, generating apps or something like that.
Right.
But the work that we did was really to investigate that and understand, like, is this something that AI should be doing? How do people feel about using AI for it? What kinds of problems in the space can AI solve? What kinds of errors can it detect? What errors can it not detect? That sort of thing.
So I would imagine, I'm guessing, you can absolutely tell me I'm wrong, even better for the show. Okay, so whatever learnings or findings I would imagine you had 4 to 6 years ago are probably very different today. Is that accurate? I mean, has that changed or evolved over time?
I think it depends on the context. So I would say that there are a couple of different kinds of ways to think about this. There's literally, what can the technology do? And that's obviously changed because this field is moving so quickly. Then there's like, how do people feel about it and how do they trust it? And that will change as well. Like, as soon as things become more commonplace and people start using them, or they use them in one context, they might become comfortable using it in another context. One example of this, I think, would be things like recommendation systems that we see in like all our apps now. When those came out, I think there was a lot of mixed feelings. Sometimes these things were like they just gave bad recommendations. Sometimes people thought it was creepy. Sometimes they like weren't really sure what was going on. But now they're everywhere, and people are like, "Yeah, of course, I'm going to expect like my apps to recommend things to me." Um, so I think some of in that sense, like things have definitely changed. But I would say in general, like the principles of how do you bring AI into these processes, how do you make recommendations, how do you signal to users that like something might not actually be right? Because again, when you're dealing with these like non-deterministic situations, there are lots of things that might differ from generation to generation, or output to output. So I think that that principle of like signaling uncertainty, being able to explain to users what's going on, ensuring that users trust the output and what happens if they don't trust the output, like those are I think all the same in many ways.
What are your thoughts on how AI is used specifically for UX research?
That's a great question. So UX research and AI is also an emerging space. Um, I will say that like day to day, I'm I'm thinking about UX research and AI probably in a lot of the ways, like for a lot of very common like non-UX use cases. So can AI generate a transcript of something that I'm doing? Can it help me summarize if I read a ton of articles, if I'm trying to like, I don't know, do a literature review, like maybe AI can help me find those articles that would be relevant. Maybe it can help me summarize them. Um, I think that so I think there are a lot of great tools out there that many companies are creating that are bringing AI into this process to expedite things. On the other hand, like I still think that humans need to be at the center of it, and researchers need to bring their personal expertise. Um, AI is AI is a super valuable tool, but as we all know, it's not perfect. Sometimes it generates things that aren't right. Sometimes it misses things. Sometimes it over indexes on something that is actually inconsequential. And that's why, like, I, as a researcher, always want to go back through things and make sure that what I like, if it does, even if it summarizes an interview for me, like making sure that I go through the transcript, I'm like, yes, I definitely heard all of these things. When they said this, that's actually what I heard. Listening to the recording, and making sure that anything that it summarizes is consistent with my understanding. Um, so I think that I don't see it as a replacement for research. I see it as an expediter for tasks that for me might be like really manual or take a really long time, but absolutely I'm going to need to review it myself in the end.
So, being that you spent so much time in this space, is there anything that you're looking forward to as people become more comfortable with AI?
I think I'm excited to see where the technology goes. I think I'm also excited for people to come up with their own personal understandings of what the limits and benefits are. I think we see a lot of these headlines that are like AI is replacing these jobs or AI will make this thing in UX obsolete. And I don't have a crystal ball, I don't know, but I do think from the work that I've done and from what I've seen in the research out there that like there are a lot of things that I could throw at AI, but it probably wouldn't really do the job in the same way that a human researcher would, and I think a human researcher needs to be at the center of it. So I'm hoping that we get to a place where there's a broader understanding of that, where people are comfortable handing over specific tasks, but also really want to remain in the driver's seat for much of the work.
Um, I was thinking about because I've done several of these. They're not all
Mhm.
with researchers, right? So I'm gonna geek out with you because I can. Do you have a favorite research methodology?
In That is such an interesting question. Well, I love talking to people. I think that's partly why I'm in this field. So interviews are usually super fun. Um, I would say two things that I enjoy though in particular are first, like participatory design. I I've done a lot of so I've worked with a lot, mostly in enterprise my entire career. So I've worked with doctors, I've worked with like roboticists, I've worked with engineers, and sometimes like if you actually ask people to talk to you or explain things to you, they're not always super comfortable opening up. Interviews can be awkward. They can be challenging. Someone might have something that they want to describe to you, but you don't have the technical background they do. So, like, you don't get it. And that's why I think participatory design can be so great because it's another vehicle for people to really meet you in their element. Um, I've done sessions where, like, people have sketched things or even, like, developers have written pseudocode to communicate an idea to me. And that's been very, very powerful. And I think it's a great way to get to the heart of things. Um, the other method that I generally enjoy is surveys. It's funny because before I came to Google, I think I had written like one survey. And I remember talking to a friend who had gone to grad school and had taken an entire course on questionnaire design. And I was like so overwhelmed by that. I was like, this is an art. Like people get PhDs in this. I have no idea what I'm doing. And then of course, like my first 6 months here were mostly writing surveys. So they've really grown on me. I still, I don't have a PhD in survey sciences. I don't think I'll ever be at that level, but I feel like it's something that I have built a lot of personal experience and comfort with. And I really like thinking about how do you write a good survey question. I have a lot of, I don't know if they're good opinions, but a lot of opinions on scales. And I've just like really enjoyed learning about that and talking to people who have made it their life passion and thinking about how to measure things, especially things that like are very qualitative and can at first blush be hard to measure.
I'm going to double click into a couple of things. So I also love participatory design.
Hmm.
I have found that some researchers, like when they're getting started, they are intimidated for some of those really technical kind of
Hmm.
conversations. But I have found that even if I know exactly what they're talking about, pretending like I don't is valuable, right? Because
Yeah.
then, like you said, they're sketching you things and they're let me
Hmm.
break this down to like the lowest common denominator so you can get it. I love that part. Going into the surveys, Is there something that you learned in that first 6 months at Google that you wish you had learned earlier? Like, was there like something that clicked and it was like, oh, okay, this is what I wish I had known sooner?
I mean, I wish I had just learned, like, what makes a good survey. I think it's fairly easy to like, for me anyway, I think it became fairly easy to figure out what a bad survey was because, like, I couldn't figure out how to answer a question or something. But I think, like, what makes it good is something that I wish that I had learned. I had a I think compared to some UXers, I had a very non-traditional education. I think a lot of people do come in with backgrounds in psychology or computer science, and that's sort of the world that I came from. But I didn't I didn't take classes in human factors. I certainly never took anything in questionnaire design. And I I think that absolutely can be taught in any context. Like, you can learn it on the job like I did. You can read a book about it, but I wish that I had gotten more hands-on instruction. Um, I think the other thing is that surveys are like any interviewing method in that they should be piloted. Um, some of the best things that or some of the best advice I got early on was, like, do a usability study on your survey. Like, go to somebody who represents your target population, maybe several people who represent different segments, and have them walk through the survey with you verbally. Also, like, give it to other people, see how long it takes for them to get through it, have them tell you where they got stuck if there are questions that aren't clear. Um, I think that would have saved me a lot of stress at various points in my career.
What I've also done to kind of adapt to that is if I'm using, let's say I have an unmoderated tool, I'll run 5 or 10 people through that survey, let them do it
Mhm.
unmoderated so I can hear what they say and how they process it. And that is my test, right, of the survey before I launch it. Um, okay. Thinking for those people who are like, I wish I knew more about survey design, do you have resources that you would send them to or that you typically share for that?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of good books on user experience. There is a book on quantitative UX research that I believe is written by Carrie Rodden, Chris Chapman. I can get the name for you and can put it in the notes. But that's a really great one. It talks about many different quantitative methods, including surveys. There's also a researcher named Jeff Soro who runs a website, yeah, Measuring You, and that's sort of all about everything in terms of measurements. Has a lot of really great advice on survey design. So those are two places I'd recommend starting.
I think we talked, I think you and I attended, you went to UXPA Toronto, right?
Hmm.
Okay, so I think that's where you and I both, we didn't know each other then, but we spoke at that one. And that's where I met Jeff Sorrow. And
Oh, cool. Yeah.
he made, okay, so first of all, if you're listening to this podcast and you don't know who that is, stop here, go do that and then come back. But one of the things that he did that I love because he talks about all these quantitative methods, which again can be very intimidating for some people, but he's very down to earth. And my favorite presentation is where he was doing like a side by side of what people are calling personas
Hmm.
and a dating profile and how they looked almost the same. And I was
It's
like,
amazing.
I love that so much. Okay. All right. So my personal favorite design or research methodology is a right study. I love a rapid iterative. I just don't get to
Hmm.
do them nearly as much as we used to, but that one was pretty cool too.
That is
Okay.
pretty cool.
All right. So thinking about you, what excites you about your role today?
I well, I love managing people. I work with a really great group of researchers, and I learn from them all the time. I think that I've also been able to grow as a leader myself by learning how to work with them, how to lead them. I think as my team has grown, as they become more senior, also just understanding, like, how do you delegate? How do you really make space for people to shine, especially where they have skills that you don't? And really, I think, like, understanding that leading a team is for me anyway, is very much like a player coach mentality. Like, I'm here to set people up for success. I'm not here to make all the decisions. So I think just really trying to understand that, working with really great people has been such a privilege. And I think I've always been very interested in thinking about what are the implications of these very tactical things that we're finding, and how can I make sense of that? How can I help other people make sense of that? So the strategic storytelling that I get to do has also been such a joy. And especially because I do a lot of this work in a very cross-functional space where I have design partners and engineering partners and PM partners, I feel like I've learned quite a bit about like how to tell a story in an effective way, or at least I've seen it modeled for me. So,
Okay, so let's talk about managing people. First of all, I appreciate hearing you say that that is something that you enjoy, right?
mhm.
And I don't know that people really understand like that has to be a prereq because managing people can be difficult. So let's go back to
Yeah.
how that transition happened. Were you voluntold or did you have a desire to manage people?
A little of each. So
Okay.
I definitely considered it at some point. I think throughout my career, I thought maybe this is something that I would be interested in trying at some point, but it wasn't really something that I had a goal, like I'm going to manage by this year or at this, this juncture. But then we had a management gap in the team, and at some point, sort of towards the middle of 2021, I was asked to step into a manager role. And I had a lot of questions about it and some reservations, I think, at the time. It was also just like a very strange time in the world. Still we're still in COVID, but people were going back to the office. I think our office was about to reopen in a very like small way. Um, and I think going from basically like being a researcher who was doing some strategic work and thinking about what other researchers were doing, but like was not in an official position of managerial authority, to like suddenly having to do performance reviews and hire people was like very intimidating. Um, I think one thing that I did at the time, and it was I did it in a very maybe anxious way. But looking back, I'm glad I did this thing. I had a lot of discussions with my leadership about like what does success look like for a manager in their first 6 to 12 months, um, and what kind of resources can I rely on. And I was encouraged by my then VP to do a like 30, 60, 90-day work back. Where just thinking about like, what do I think I'm going to need to do in this time? What would success look like for me? What kind of support would I envision needing? And really just spending time thinking through that, because even though I was taking on this manager role in a team that I had been on for several years at that point, working with people that I knew, it was effectively a totally new role, and to treat it in the same way that I would treat any new job. Um, I also had some training for sure. I got very lucky in that there were two other researchers that I knew in my broader organization who were put into management around the same time. We were all at similar places in our careers, so we would meet regularly to compare notes and give each other advice and heads up about things that might be happening. Um, and then I actually got a new manager in the middle of this who was new to the company but had managerial experience from elsewhere. So that was also a useful partnership, because we were figuring out like, how do you manage at this place just from two very different perspectives. So I got a lot of support. It was definitely intimidating. I definitely, looking back, there are certainly things I would have done differently, but ultimately I think I grew into the role and have grown to enjoy it in a lot of ways.
What advice would you give someone who is thinking about, has a desire to, or is being pushed into a people management role?
So I think the thing I would ask someone who's thinking about it or who actively wants it is why. Like, it's not, I don't mean this in a why would you ever do this? I think it's a totally valid and important thing to do. But what are your motivations? Um, I think, and again, this depends on the company, it depends on the size of your team, but I think a lot of people, myself included, who start managing think, okay, I'll still have time to do individual contributor work. And of course, sometimes you do, or sometimes you're set up in that way. But I remember getting advice fairly early where someone said, as soon as you have 3 people on your team, something's usually going on. And it doesn't have to be a bad thing, but it could be like somebody's out and they need coverage, or there's like a conflict between two people that you need to get involved with, or someone just has like a situation that you don't know how to handle and they don't know how to handle, and you have to spend like all of your time reading documentation. And that definitely chips away at your time that you might otherwise spend doing other things. So I think making sure that like you're getting into it for the right reasons and that you're setting the right expectations for yourself and for your peers and for your team. Um, Another thing that I would say is meet your team where they are. Some of the some of the best managers I've had like set up initial meetings with me when I started reporting to them and asked me like, how do you like to get feedback? What has worked for you with your previous managers and what hasn't? And really trying to understand like what does a successful manager or managerial relationship look like for this individual? And that might be different for another person on your team. You don't have to be like 10 different people, but I have notes on like, person A on my team really likes written feedback. So if they send me something to look at and I cover it in comments, that's not going to upset them. But there are other people who really like to meet with you and talk you through it and do that all verbally. And I really try to keep that in mind. So basically, to sum up, I would say think about motivations, set real expectations, talk to a lot of people about their experiences and ensure that it's consistent with like how you're thinking about it. And then really like try to understand what your individual team members want, treat them as individuals because they are, and what works for one person might not work for others. And the last thing I would say is like know your limits. Like many of the people on my team are much better at certain things than I am, and that's wonderful. I mean, and that's why I one of many reasons why I love having them on my team. My job isn't to like coach them on statistical methods they don't understand because I don't understand them either. My job is to find them people who are experts in those methods and make sure that they have the support they need. And and also I guess find out like do they even want to be doing that work. So I think that it's really like know that you don't have to have all the answers, but you have to be persistent in pursuing them on behalf of others.
I agree 1,000%. I tell my team, like, I don't know that I should always be doing research anymore because my brain is now thinking differently, right? I'm concerned about you as a person, less about some of these other things. And it really is a mind shift. In that, I like to ask this question because I want individual contributors to understand like the power of their voice in these conversations. So, thinking about, I don't know what your team or your organization calls like a one-on-one, right? So, a
Mhm.
meeting when you're talking to your directs. What are some things that people can do with that time to make the most out of it?
Yeah, that's a really good question that I should think about more. I think I have a I have a document, like a one-on-one document with everybody on my team. And I I ask them to use it however they would like. Some people treat it more as a journal, where they'll just like write things, thoughts they have throughout the week, or whatever the interval is in between meetings. And other people will treat it more as a checklist or a set of updates where they're like, I did this, I did that. Um, I got some feedback recently from one of my reports about how they thought that they should be more proactive in telling me about blockers. And that was really good feedback for me. But I also thought, like, I should set you up to be in a position where, like, you can just tell me, like, you shouldn't have to go out of your way. So I created a template for all of them to try and give me feedback on that was basically like in the last week or however long it's been, what were your wins? What were your blockers? What are other things I should know? And then like other topics. And some people stick to that format. Some people cover those things in other ways. But I would say that like having that be the structure to make sure that like generally we're talking about those things is really important. Um, The other thing that I try to do is really just emphasize that one-on-ones are their time. There are things that absolutely, like, I will want to or need to discuss at various points, but in general, like, this is a touch point on a usually weekly basis where they have my full attention. I'm here to hear them, to talk about whatever they want. Um, and if we need more time or if we need another format, that's okay too.
Um, for you and your personal development, I've heard people call it, they have a personal board, they have mentors. I don't know what you call it. Do you have a board? Do you have mentors that you go to?
Yeah, I would love to have a personal board. I think that's been a goal of mine for a while, to sort of figure out like who those people need to be and what roles they need to fill. I'm I would say that I have a number of great mentors and coaches. I think there are some people who are in that role more formally. Um, I have a manager coach, for example, who is someone whom I take managerial and leadership questions to, and we meet roughly every 2 weeks, and she gives me feedback. I have some other people that I look up to because of what they do as researchers or designers, or they're really good leaders, or they're just like really good people who give really good advice. And I try to have regular touch points with them as well. Um, I also, I mean, this isn't the same, but I really believe in like the 360 system, where I want lateral feedback and I want feedback from above, whether those are people who are actually above me in my organization or my peers, versus, or they're just people who like do similar things or are leaders and I want to learn from them. But I also want to hear from my team or from people that I mentor, and really hear from them, like, how can I be better at this? How can I serve you? Or if you don't report to me, like, what has not been working for you that I could also make sure to take to heart? Um, so I have nothing super official, but I definitely have a lot of people that I'm very fortunate to learn from and to go to.
In your career, I think we all have like our defining moments, right? Where it was like either a big win or a success or an aha moment. Do you have any moments in your career that stick out to you that is like, that was a great moment or a great project or a great win?
Yeah, I've had a few. I would say one big one was maybe about 2 years in, when I presented at my first conference, and I had been working on some metrics related thing that my coworker had pushed me to submit, which was also like a big win because I hadn't thought about that. But we got to this conference and I got to present it to a bunch of people who worked at other companies, who worked in completely different spaces. And they all had questions and feedback and comments, but it really felt like a dialogue. I was quite junior at the time, and I think just realizing like, oh, this is an area where I have some expertise and I can like approach strangers as a peer, I think felt very validating. I'm so I think that was for me, that was a big sign for like I'm growing, and I feel like I have the confidence to really own this space and go and talk about it. I would say more recently, I think just learning, I think especially with some of my trepidation about becoming a manager and doing a good job managing, I think as I've as I've seen people on my team grow and thrive, obviously like they get the credit. Like they did the things. They are the ones growing. They are the ones accomplishing these amazing things. But sort of seeing like where I have cleared the path for them to do something, or how I've been able to improve the ways that I work with them and support them, has also been very validating, and it's made me feel a lot more confident in my decision to be and remain a manager.
So, in thinking about that, do you keep one of my old bosses called it a brag
Mhm.
sheet? Do you keep a brag sheet for yourself, like your wins? Do you track those things?
I should.
You should, Clara.
I
You
should. I think
definitely
that's a great
should.
idea.
You should.
What I did, so one thing I started doing a number of years ago, and I've actually gotten quite sloppy about this, but I have recommended other people do it, is an impact tracker. So basically, when I think about like performance reviews, whether I'm keeping notes for myself or I'm writing them for someone on my team, like I'm sort of interested in this general formula. What was the problem? What did you do to address it? Assuming it's a research project, like what method did you do? What did you find? What did you recommend? what was the outcome? Like, what did the team do about your recommendation or whoever you're trying to influence? And then how did you know it was a good outcome? And that might be a metric, that might be qualitative feedback, that might be some other thing. But I sort of tried to create this formula, and then maybe there would be some other things thrown in there, like notes or deliverables or like praise from someone. But basically, just have that as a reference. It often ended up being good fodder for performance review related things or promotion related things. But I also felt like it was just a nice thing to look at. Um, so I encourage other people to do that. I should get better at doing it myself. This is a good reminder, but I do think it can be at minimum it can be a very validating thing to look back on, and it can also be a useful tool when you're like really trying to articulate the impact of your career. Another small thing that a piece of advice I got from someone, but I have like a party popper label that I use in my email. So like if somebody sends me like a hey, this was really great. Like thank you for doing that, or this person on your team did this awesome thing. Like make sure to tell them that. Like I'll label the message with that, and then every so often I go back through and just be like, okay, what happened in the last 6 months that we should be celebrating. So
Mm-hmm. That is awesome. I love that. I love that. Just because sometimes you just need to remember
mhm.
how awesome you are, right? And then to just so then when you do that, do you share that back out with the team? Like, is this like a way back when, like a throwback Thursday kind of a thing? Like, we're kind of at a slow point. Let's remember that win we had last month. How do you do that?
I try to so when I have team meetings, I definitely try to make sure that I'm calling out everybody for something that they did. I think I want to encourage a culture of like, hey, this thing happened, or over the last quarter, here were three major wins. I do a end of year deck for my team where I talk about like here are all the things that the major things that we did, here are the major milestones. Um, I've Again, another thing that I have done occasionally that I should do more is like a newsletter that goes out both to my team but also to stakeholders. And I'm like, here's why everybody on the team is awesome. Here are some things that they did. Here are some major wins that we had, and really like putting their accomplishments at the center and making sure that they get credit because I really want them to be the stars of the show.
Yep. So one thing that you and I have in common is we apparently love to give our time away. So you are with Ladies at UX in New York. Tell us
Mhm.
about that organization and how you got involved.
Yeah, so I started working or volunteering with Ladies UX in 2014 when it was fairly nascent. I think Boston was the third North American chapter. It began in the UK, and I think at that point had a large presence there and was spreading throughout the rest of Europe. I I think I found out about it like online somewhere, and I had been going to some local meetups in Boston for UX, including UXPA, and I really enjoyed them. But I think I also felt like these are really, really big. And as someone who I had just started working in UX a couple months before, um, and I think I was just looking to meet people in maybe a less intimidating environment. And I was also thinking a lot about my career and my career in particular, um, as a woman and as someone who was new to the field and just like really wanted to understand what was possible. And I really liked that Ladies UX was thinking about like the experience of being a gender minority in tech and what that meant. Um, I started the Boston chapter with after talking to the leaders in the UK and quickly met a bunch of other people who were also interested in building this community. And we were doing, I think, monthly meetups where we'd alternate between more networking style things and like mini courses about anything from what is UX like in this space, or what can you learn about UX from improv, or um, how do you how do you design good success metrics, things like that. And that was just a great way to meet people, to learn from people, and especially because like throughout most of my career I've been at these large organizations, just hear about how UX is happening in other contexts. um, I moved to San Francisco in 2016, and there was a chapter there, and I started helping out with that. And in that one, I think the Bay Area is lucky to be rich with lots of different kinds of meetups. And especially at that point in time in 2016 to 2018-ish, like you could probably go to a different UX meetup every day of the week. So we were thinking a lot about like what are specific niches that we can fill, given that there are just so many wonderful options here. And I think we did a lot on like career development. And if you're especially like a mid-level UXer, where do you go from there? Um, then I moved here in 2023, and there is also a chapter here, and I offered to help out a little bit. I think in the post-COVID world, we've really been trying to figure out like what do we want to do in person, what can we do online. I think online can be really great because you get to meet people from all over the world, and you can be much more inclusive, especially when you're in these big metropolitan areas where it can just be hard to like bring people together in a single space. Um, but also, of course, like recognizing the importance of in-person community. I think one thing I always want to emphasize is that, at least in the chapters that I've been part of, despite the name, Ladies UX is gender inclusive. We are open to everybody, and we really want to make sure that it's that everybody who wants to have a voice in UX has a voice. Um, and I think it's also like such a dynamic space and field that we also want to highlight how UX is changing, and even UX that doesn't have UX in the role title. Like there are a lot of people who are doing this kind of work, but maybe don't call themselves UXers, but are still people that we absolutely should be learning from and whose voices we should be hearing. So I'm very committed to that.
I hope that people hear that and they take that, because I want people to get more involved. But if for no other reason, it's what you said, being able to see what this looks like in different organizations. There's that piece of it. There's not having to explain to people what you do, right? Because y'all kind of all have that same thing. I think, and then for like my team, it's go listen and have some of these conversations, because I guarantee you'll walk away feeling like you know
Mhm.
more than you thought you did.
Yeah,
Like a really good confidence
absolutely.
boost. What
It
advice would
can be,
you
yeah.
give those people who consider themselves introverts, who hate people, right? And don't want to go to, who don't want to network, who don't want to do that? What would you tell them?
I would say you can always leave. I mean, like as much as I enjoy talking to people, I also have like a or I don't know what the right metaphor is, but basically I'm extroverted to a point, and then at some point I'm just like, I want to go and read a book by myself in a dark room. Um, so I tell myself this sometimes where I'm like, I will go for 30 minutes. I will see who I talk to. If I'm too tired, if it's just too overwhelming or whatever, I can always go, but it's important to me that I show up. And more often than not, I end up staying for a while because it ends up being a really good group of people. But that's number one. I think for number two is a lot of the online events that I've been to, Ladies UX and otherwise, have had breakout rooms, and that can be a lot less intimidating. Like if you're on a call with two or three people versus if you're on a call with 50. So especially if you're introverted and you're not sure about like going out and putting yourself into that environment, that might be an avenue that I recommend exploring. I really like what you said about how you often come away from these conversations realizing that you know a lot more than you think you do. I have definitely encountered that in these UX events where I've been like, especially when I was at the beginning of my career, I'm like, what am I doing here? Like, I have been working as a UX for 3 months. Like, what do I have to offer? But chances are someone's like, hey, you work in healthcare. Like, that's really interesting. I work in consumer apps. Like, tell me more about what you do. And that that is an opportunity for you to really like shine and tell people about your expertise. So, and I think like the other thing is these events are so like they're so common and they're so big, and they can be big and they can be busy. Like the stakes are pretty low. Like you'll meet people and it will be fine. So I think it's a good thing to do. I definitely am a big fan of online events, even though sometimes I I do love to get out in person because I think it's a great way to just be more inclusive and meet people from all over. And I definitely encourage that.
I'm going to steal that one because I've never thought about that, but you are so right. Like if you're uncomfortable going to an event, you can just leave, right? Like go. Again, feel the vibe. Is this something I want to do? If not, then just excuse yourself and be done with it, right? Like you
Exactly.
can, that you're not going to get in trouble. So you are so right. You are so right about that. Okay. So I want to be mindful of your time. You have been so wonderful. Is there anything else that you want to leave with my audience? Anything else you want them to think about?
First, thank you so much for your time and for these wonderful questions and this dialogue. It's been great talking to you. I I think that this is maybe a little bit cliche, but I would say that design and research are everywhere. I'm constantly finding out and thinking about UX in new contexts. I think that this is a challenging time for the field, but there is a lot of work and a lot of opportunities to bring user-centered principles to many areas that really need it. I've recently had the privilege of meeting a lot of people who work in industrial organizational psychology. So they're thinking about like the design of organizations or the design of office spaces or people who do like, I don't know, like architecture and UX. And I just think that's so cool. And there are so many different ways to enter the field if you're thinking about coming in. There are so many ways to like evolve in the field if you're sick of what you're doing. Um, See what interests you, think about the things that like really frustrate you day to day. Could they be solved in some way with user-centered principles, and then think about how to pursue that. So UX is everywhere. There are many ways to bring it to what you're passionate about, and I encourage people to explore that.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. You have been delightful, Clara. Thank you so much for joining our
Thank
show
you.
today.
Thank you.